My name is Margaret Easton. I'm 64, a retired accountant, and I thought I had done everything right. I discreetly paid for my son's new house to help him start his life, and in return, I received a text message. You're not invited. My wife doesn't want you to come.
No imo-uschen, no explanaschen.
I simply replied, okay. The next day, I made a few quiet calls about the mortgage, the trust, the payments. What happened next, they never saw coming. The navy blue dress hung, perfectly pressed, from the wardrobe door, waiting. I'd chosen it 3 days ago. Elegant but not ostentatious, the sort of outfit a 64-year-old mother should wear to her son's housewarming dinner. Nothing to outshine Chloe, of course. I'd learned that lesson a long time ago. I sat on the edge of my bed, adjusting the pearls Robert had given me on our 2nd anniversary. Just 2 years of marriage before the cancer took him, too. First David, Jack's father, when my son was barely 12, then Robert, when I'd finally started to believe I might get a second chance at love. The men in my life seemed destined to be fleeting, but the love I felt for them, and especially for Jack, remained an unbreakable constant. My phone vibrated against the bedside table. Jack. I smiled before I even read the message. He was probably asking what dessert I was bringing, or if I could come a little earlier to help with the preparations. He'd always been thoughtful that way, even as a little boy, the kind of child who would bring me wildflowers from the garden and draw me handmade Mother's Day cards. I picked up the phone, my thumb swiping across the screen. You're not invited. Chloe doesn't want you here. The words flickered on the screen as if written in a language I couldn't quite comprehend. I read the message once, then again, my eyes tracing the letters as if they might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. You're not invited. Chloe doesn't want you here. The silence in my bedroom became dense, suffocating. I could hear the tick-tock of the mantelpiece clock, the distant hum of traffic on the promenade, the barely perceptible drip of the bathroom tap I'd been putting off fixing. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary life, but now each one resonated with a strange clarity, as if my world had shifted slightly off its axis. The house, their dream cottage in the Cotswolds, with views over the rolling hills. The house with the £80,000 deposit I had transferred from my savings account without a moment's hesitation. The house whose mortgage I had co-signed because their combined income hadn't quite qualified them for the loan they wanted. The house whose monthly mortgage payments I had been quietly covering for the last 6 months, along with the gardener, the cleaning service, and the little upgrades Chloe had deemed absolutely essential. It had taken me 30 years to build those savings. 30 years of working late, skipping holidays, driving my old Rover until it literally fell apart, buying my clothes from Marks and Spencer sale racks and living in the same small one-bedroom flat I'd rented when Jack was a teenager. Even after I married Robert, I'd kept my finances separate, my savings untouched. For emergencies, I'd told him. For Jack's future. Robert had understood. You're a wonderful mother, Maggie, he'd said, kissing my forehead. He's lucky to have you.
Lucky.
I let the phone rest in my lap and stared at my reflection in the dressing table mirror. A middle-aged woman stared back at me. Gray hair neatly styled. Green eyes that Robert had said looked like sea glass. Lines around my mouth that spoke of decades of smiling even when I didn't feel like it. I looked exactly like what I was. A retired accountant who had spent her entire life being responsible, being practical, being the sort of person others could rely on. The sort of person who could be dismissed with a text message. I read the message again, this time paying attention to what it didn't say as much as what it did. There was no explanation, no apology, not even the courtesy of a phone call. Just a cold, final statement, delivered as if it were a weather update. Chloe doesn't want you here. It wasn't even his decision, apparently. He didn't even have the courage to own it. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 64 years in my knees, in my back, in the muscles of my neck that had tightened into knots. I walked over to the wardrobe where the navy dress still hung, waiting. I touched it once, feeling the soft wool fabric under my fingertips, then closed the wardrobe door. My laptop was on the kitchen table, surrounded by the financial statements I'd been reviewing before getting dressed. All the documents I had signed over the last 2 years were spread before me like a map of my own naivety. The deposit transfer, the mortgage cosigner agreement, the direct debit forms for the monthly payments. The trust one had set up for Maya, my granddaughter, which included a clause that would grant Jack access to the funds for reasonable family expenses until she turned 18. I had signed every piece of paper with love, with hope, with the quiet belief that I was building something beautiful, a foundation for my family to thrive, a legacy that would give them the security I'd never had growing up. Now, the documents looked different, like evidence of something I had fundamentally misunderstood. I picked up my phone again, my fingers trembling slightly as I typed my reply. Okay. 2 simple words. Clean. True. Because it was. It was okay. Or it would be. I pressed send, and then, without a pause, I found another number in my contacts. James, my voice sounded surprisingly calm. It's Maggie Easton. I know it's the weekend, but I need to see you on Monday morning. It's urgent. James Atherton had been my financial advisor for 5 years, since shortly after Robert died, and I realized I needed help navigating the complexities of managing 2 estates and planning my own retirement. He was young, probably no older than Jack, but he had the kind of orderly, meticulous mind that I appreciated. More importantly, he treated me with respect. He listened when I spoke. He had never once made me feel as if my questions were stupid or my concerns trivial. Of course, Mrs. Easton, he said now, and I could hear the genuine concern in his voice. Is everything all right? I'm reevaluating some of my financial arrangements, I said. All of them. There was a pause. James was clever enough to read between the lines. I understand, he said finally. 9 o'clock okay? Perfect. I hung up and stood in my small kitchen, looking out the window at the flat across the way, where a young woman was feeding a baby in a high chair. The scene looked warm, intimate, the kind of moment I had pictured having with Maya when she was older. Maya, my bright-eyed granddaughter who called me Grandma Maggie and still climbed into my lap for story time, who had given me a handmade bead necklace for Mother's Day and insisted I wear it immediately, even though the garish, multicolored beads clashed with everything in my wardrobe, who sent me drawings in the post because she'd decided that was more special than just giving them to me in person. I thought of her, sitting at the dinner table tonight, wondering where Grandma Maggie was, wondering why I hadn't come to see her new bedroom, the butterfly stickers she'd been so excited to show me. My heart clenched, but I didn't give in to it. Not yet. Instead, I walked back to my bedroom and changed out of my smart trousers and silk blouse into comfortable jeans and a jumper. I had work to do. The next 2 days passed in a strange, suspended state. I received no further messages from Jack, no phone call, no belated explanation or apology. It was as if the dinner party had happened in a parallel universe where I simply didn't exist. On Monday morning, I arrived at James's office 15 minutes early, with a briefcase full of documents and a handwritten list of everything I wanted to cancel, amend, or revoke. I had organized it all by priority, starting with the direct debits that could be processed that same week. James met me at his office door with fresh coffee and the kind of carefully neutral expression he'd likely perfected from working with clients going through divorces or dealing with family deaths. "Please sit," he said, closing the door behind us. "Tell me what's happening." I told him everything. The text message, the years of financial support, the pattern of being included only when convenient and excluded when not. I spoke in the same calm, factual voice I'd used for decades to explain discrepancies in audits and budgetary irregularities. This was no different, really. Just numbers that didn't add up. James listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me with those dark, serious eyes. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, the feeling of being unappreciated. It was a good question, one I had been avoiding asking myself. Years, I admitted, but I hoped things would get better. When Maya was older, that he'd need me more, not less. And now? Now, I realized they never really needed me, I said. Just my money. James nodded slowly. Right. Let's see what we can do. What we could do, it turned out, was substantial. The direct debits could be stopped immediately. My name could be removed from the mortgage within 30 days. provided Jack and Chloe could qualify for refinancing on their own or find a different cosigner. The trust was more complicated, but the smile gradually faded as I walked to my car in the multi-story car park, but something more solid replaced it. A sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years, as if I'd been living in a dimly lit room and someone had finally thrown open the curtains, flooding the space with uncompromising daylight. The air itself seemed sharper, the gray London sky more defined. The next morning, James rang to confirm that all the initial actions had been processed. The direct debits were stopped. My name had been formally removed as an authorized signatory on several accounts. The documents for the trust fund amendment were being drafted by the legal department. "How are you feeling?" he asked, and I could detect a note of genuine admiration in his voice, a slight departure from his usual professional reserve. "Like I've finally woken up," I told him, and it was the truest thing I'd said in a long time. For the last 48 hours, I'd felt a strange energy thrumming through my veins. It wasn't anger. Anger was too hot, too chaotic. This was something colder and more precise. It was purpose. That afternoon, I sat at my writing desk with a sheet of thick, cream-colored paper in front of me. It was something I'd been putting off since Robert died. Writing him a letter. Grief counselors always talked about the importance of closure, but I'd never truly understood what that meant until now. My fountain pen, a heavy silver one he'd given me, felt cool and solid in my hand. Asterisk, my dearest Robert. Asterisk, I wrote, the ink flowing smoothly onto the page. Asterisk, I know this might seem strange, writing to you after all this time, but I need to tell you about some things that have happened. Things I don't think you would have seen coming, any more than I did. Do you remember when you first met Jack? You were so afraid of overstepping, of trying to be his father when he'd already had one that he'd lost. But he took to you so easily, didn't he? He adored you. You used to say it was because I'd raised a good man, someone with an open heart. I think we were both wrong about that. Asterisk, I stopped writing and looked out of the window at the block of flats opposite. The young mother was there again, this time hanging tiny clothes on a drying rack on her balcony. Something about the ordinary domesticity of the scene, the little t-shirts, the minuscule socks flapping in the breeze, made me feel a sharp pang of loss. Asterisk, he dismissed me, Robert, with a text message. After everything we've given, everything we built for him, he cast me aside as if I were a piece of junk mail. And the strange thing is, I'm not as surprised as I should be. I think a part of me has been expecting this for years. The phone calls that grew less frequent, the visits that always felt rushed, the way his eyes would glaze over when I talked about my plans for retirement, as if my dreams were minor inconveniences. Do you know what hurts the most? It's not the money. The money is just paper, numbers on a screen. It's that I truly believed we were building something together. Family. A legacy. Something that would last beyond us. But you can't build a family with only one person, can you? No matter how much love you pour into it. Asterisk, the phone rang, shrill and insistent, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Lena's name, my childhood friend, who had re-entered my life after we'd both retired. We'd reconnected at a school reunion 2 years ago, and discovered we'd both ended up living lives that were completely different from what we'd imagined at 18. Maggie, Lena said without preamble when I answered, "What the hell is going on?" I saw Jack in Waitrose this morning and he looked like he'd seen a ghost. I leaned back in my chair, not surprised that news traveled fast. London was a big city, but certain circles were small. Things have changed, I told her. Come over, Lena said immediately. Right now. I have wine and I have time. Lena lived in a sleek, modern flat in Islington that was everything my own flat wasn't. Spacious, minimalist, and filled with art she'd actually chosen rather than inherited. By the time I arrived, she had already opened a bottle of crisp Sauvignon Blanc and laid out a plate of cheese and crackers on her glass coffee table. She herself was the picture of modern retirement, dressed in elegant, wide-legged trousers and a silk blouse. Her silver hair cut in a sharp, stylish bob that framed her face and highlighted her intelligent, curious eyes. She exuded a confidence that I was only just beginning to discover in myself. Right, she said, filling 2 large glasses. Start from the beginning. I told her everything, Every detail, from the text message to my meeting with James, to the letter I'd been writing to Robert. Lena listened with the kind of focused attention that only true friends can give, not interrupting, not offering premature solutions, just pure presence. When I'd finished, she was silent for a long moment, swirling the wine in her glass. "Do you know what really gets me about all this?" she said finally. "What? That it's not even about the money for them. It's about control." She took a sip of wine, her eyes flashing with indignation on my behalf. "They wanted your financial support, but they didn't want to deal with you as a person. They wanted you to be a silent cash machine that appeared when convenient and disappeared when not." It was a crude way of putting it, but not an inaccurate one. "And now," Lena continued, "they're finding out that cash machines have off buttons." Despite everything, I laughed. It was the first time I had genuinely laughed since Saturday. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" I asked. Lena looked at me as if I'd just asked the most ridiculous question in the world. "Maggie, darling, you've been doing the right thing for 64 years. It's about time the right thing worked for you for a change." We spent the next hour talking about other things, her plans to convert her spare room into a pottery studio, my half-formed idea of finally taking those Italian classes I'd been putting off, the trip to Tuscany we had been vaguely discussing for months. It was refreshing to talk about the future in terms of possibilities instead of obligations. When I got home that evening, there was an envelope slipped under my door. My name was written on the front in a child's careful print, and I immediately recognized Maya's handwriting. Inside was a crayon drawing of 3 figures standing in front of a house. A tall woman with gray hair, obviously me. A little girl with pigtails, obviously Maya. And a smaller figure that took me a moment to recognize as a dog. At the bottom, in carefully formed letters, she had written, "I miss you, Grandma Maggie. When can I visit again?" I sat down on my sofa, holding the drawing, and felt the first real tears I'd shed since Saturday. Not tears of self-pity or rage, but something deeper. Grief, perhaps, for the family I had thought we were, for the grandmother I had hoped to be. But there was something else in there too, a kind of protective fierceness I recognized from when Jack was little and other children would tease him for not having a father. Nobody, not even her own father, was going to use Maya as a pawn in their adult games. I folded the drawing carefully and put it on my fridge, then went back to my desk to finish my letter. "I think you'd be proud of me, Robert. I'm learning not to apologize for taking up space. I'm learning that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just dependency in disguise. And maybe, just maybe, it's not too late for me to find out who I am when I'm not being someone's mother or someone's wife or someone's bank. Maybe at 64, I can finally just be Maggie. I love you, I will always love you, but I also love myself enough now not to settle for less than I deserve. Forever yours. Maggie. I sealed the letter in an envelope and put it in my desk drawer, along with all the other letters I would never send. But writing it had served its purpose. It had helped to clarify something that had been forming in my mind for days. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about teaching Jack a lesson, though I suspected he was about to learn one anyway. This was about reclaiming my own narrative, about recognizing that I had been living my life as a supporting character in someone else's story when I should have been the protagonist of my own. The following day, James called with an update. "The bank contacted your son this morning," he said, "about the removal of the cosigner. Apparently, he was unaware you had initiated the process." "Interesting," I said, though I wasn't particularly surprised. Jack had always been the sort of person who assumed things would simply take care of themselves. He also continued, "I've been thinking about our conversation regarding your will. Have you considered establishing a foundation? Something focused on, say, financial literacy for young women? It could be a powerful way to create the kind of legacy you truly want." The idea resonated immediately. How many times had I seen young women, colleagues, friends of friends, even strangers in supermarket queues, struggle with financial decisions because no one had ever taught them they had the power to make them? "Tell me more," I said. As James outlined the possibilities, scholarships, workshops, mentorship programs, I felt that same sense of clarity I'd experienced on Monday, as if I were viewing my life from a different altitude, where patterns that had been hidden suddenly became obvious. I had spent decades building financial security for other people. Maybe it was time to use that expertise to build something more lasting. Something that would carry my name not as an obligation, but as a choice. When I hung up the phone, I walked to my fridge and looked at Maya's drawing again. The little figure with pigtails smiled out at me from the page, surrounded by the simple, hopeful world only children can create. It would take time, but I would find a way to keep that little girl in my life without sacrificing my own dignity in the process. I had to. After all, what was the point of being a grandmother if you couldn't model what it meant to be a strong woman? On Thursday morning, I was watering the plants on my small balcony when my phone rang. The number wasn't in my contacts, but I recognized the London area code. Probably a cold caller, but something made me answer anyway. Mrs. Easton? The voice was professional, curt. Marcus Chun from Pinnacle Construction. I'm calling about the project in the Cotswolds. It seems there was an issue with the last payment and, I'm sorry, I interrupted him gently. I think you have the wrong number. I don't have any projects with you. There was a pause. Aren't you Zachary Easton's mother? He gave us this number as a backup contact for billing. I understood immediately what had happened. Of course Jack had put my information down as a backup. Of course he had assumed I would be there to cover anything that went over budget. I am no longer responsible for Mr. Easton's expenses, I said firmly. You'll have to contact him directly. I hung up and stared at my phone, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. The satisfaction was obvious, but the sorrow took me by surprise. It wasn't sorrow for the decision I'd made, but for the realization of just how deeply Jack had taken my support for granted. He had been so sure I would be there that he hadn't even considered updating his contact information. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time it was a number I did recognize. Mom. Jack's voice was tight, forced. I need to talk to you. Hello, Jack. Can I come over? I'm in your area anyway. A lie, but I let it slide. Of course. He arrived 20 minutes later, and the moment I saw him through the peephole, I knew the last 48 hours had not been kind to him. His normally perfectly styled hair was disheveled. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he was wearing the same wrinkled dress shirt I'd seen in the photos from the housewarming dinner on Chloe's Instagram. I opened the door, and he walked in without waiting for an invitation, as he had always done. But something in his body language was different. Less entitled, more desperate. Coffee? I offered, heading towards the kitchen. Yes, thanks. He sat at my small dining table, the same place he'd done his A-level revision, where we'd had countless conversations about his dreams and plans. Mom, I need to understand what's happening. I poured coffee into 2 mugs and sat opposite him. What do you mean? The payments, the bank, the contractors. His voice cracked slightly. Everything is falling apart. That I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. He'd put on weight, mostly in his face and around his middle. His skin had that grayish pallor that comes from stress and too little sleep. He didn't look like the confident boy I had raised, or the ambitious young man who had gone off to university with grand dreams. He looked like a man who had been living beyond his means, and the bill had finally come due. I sent you a message on Saturday, I said calmly. You told me I wasn't welcome at your dinner. So I removed myself. You didn't just remove yourself, you canceled everything. His voice rose, and for a moment I saw a flash of the little boy who used to throw tantrums when things didn't go his way. Yes, I said simply. I did. Why? The question came out as a whine. Over one stupid text message? Mom, you know what Chloe gets like. She gets, sensitive about family stuff. Her mother is so critical and she projects that onto. No, I interrupted him. We're not going to do that. Do what? We are not going to blame Chloe for your choices. We are not going to act as if you are a victim of someone else's emotions. I leaned back in my chair, surprised at my own firmness. You are a 35-year-old man, Jack. You send a hurtful message to your mother, that is your decision. You exclude the person who has been financially propping up your lifestyle, these are the consequences. His face went through several expressions. Confusion, anger, something that might have been shame. Fine, he said finally. You're right. The message was bad.
I'm sorry.
But can't we just move past this? Go back to how things were? No. The word hung in the air between us, stark and final. What do you mean, no? I mean I am no longer going to fund your life. I mean I am no longer going to co-sign your decisions. I mean I am no longer going to pretend that a relationship where I am only welcome when you need something is a relationship at all. Jack shot to his feet, beginning to pace back and forth in my small kitchen like a caged animal. You don't understand, he said. The house, we have payments to make. Contractors who are depending on us. And Chloe, God, Chloe is. He ran his hands through his hair. She's talking about going back to her parents. Taking Maya. There it was. The card I had been waiting for him to play. Maya, I said softly. Yes, Maya. He turned to me, and I could see the calculation in his eyes, the hope that the mention of my granddaughter might soften me. She misses you, Mum. She keeps asking when she's going to see you again. I'm sure she does. Then help us. For her, if not for us. I stood up and walked to the fridge, where Maya's drawing was stuck with a heart-shaped magnet she'd given me last year. I looked at it, that little figure with pigtails smiling out from the page, and felt the familiar pull on my heart. But I also remembered something Lena had said the other night. Emotional blackmailers always know exactly which buttons to push. You know what, Jack, I said, turning to face him. You're right. Maya does miss me, and I miss her. But using the love I have for my granddaughter to manipulate me into subsidizing your marriage isn't parenting. It's emotional pimping. His eyes widened. In all our years of conflict, and there had been many, especially during his teenage years, I had never spoken to him so bluntly. That's horrible, he whispered. Yes, I agreed. It is. And yet, here we are. He slumped back into his chair, suddenly looking much older than his 35 years. I don't know what to do, he admitted. Chloe is furious. Her parents are saying, I told you so. The contractors are threatening to sue, and the bank, he gave a bitter laugh. The bank wants to know how we're going to qualify for the mortgage without your income as a backup. Those are all very real consequences, I said. He looked at me as if I'd lost my mind. And I need your help. No, you need to take charge of your own life. I sat down again, feeling strangely calm. It was as if I was having a conversation I'd been putting off for years. When you were 12 and your father died, I said, I made a promise. I promised myself I would make sure you never felt financial insecurity the way I had growing up. I worked double shifts, I shopped at charity shops so I could pay for your university tuition. I lived in flats that were too small so I could save for your future. And I'm grateful. I'm not finished. My voice was firm but not cruel. Somewhere along the way, that promise turned into something else. It turned into an excuse for you to never have to deal with the real-world consequences of your choices. It turned into a reason for you to see me not as your mother, but as your financial backup plan. That's not fair. I looked him straight in the eye. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was? When was the last time you asked about my plans, my dreams, my worries? When was the last time you treated me like a person instead of a resource? The silence stretched between us. I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock, the distant hum of traffic, the ordinary sounds of a life that suddenly felt extraordinarily clear. Finally, Jack spoke. What do you want me to say? Nothing, I replied. I don't want you to say anything. I want you to think. I want you to go home to your wife and your daughter and figure out how to. After he left, I sat in my silent kitchen for a long time. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vengeful. Mostly, I just felt tired, as if I'd been carrying something heavy for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to walk without the load. But I also felt something else, something it took me a moment to recognize. I felt freed. My phone rang once more that afternoon. This time it was Lena. So, how did it go? She asked without preamble. Hard, I admitted, but necessary. He tried to use Maya as leverage. Of course he did. And did it work? No, I said, feeling a small smile pull at the corners of my mouth. No, it didn't work at all. Good, Lena said with fierce satisfaction. You're finally learning, then. Learning that real love sometimes looks a lot like letting go. That night, I wrote one more letter. This time to Maya, though I knew I wouldn't be able to send it to her until she was older. But writing it felt important, anyway. Asterisk, my dearest Maya. Asterisk, asterisk, someday, when you're old enough to understand, I want you to know something important. Sometimes the people we love the most ask us to be less than we are, so that they can feel comfortable being less than they could be. When that happens, and it will, because you are strong and bright and you will have your own light to protect, I want you to remember that saying no to that is not a failure of love. It is the deepest form of love there is. I love you, little one. I will always love you. But I also love myself enough to show you what it looks like when a woman stands up for herself. I hope someday you'll thank me for it. Asterisk asterisk with all my love. Asterisk asterisk Grandma Maggie asterisk I tucked the letter away with the other one, certain that one day I would have the chance to give it to her. And if not, well, at least I would have tried to live in a way that taught her the lesson without words. 2 weeks after the confrontation with Jack, I woke up on a Saturday morning feeling restless. It wasn't anxiety, I'd learned to recognize the difference, but something more like undirected energy, as if my body had been waiting for something for so long it had forgotten how to be still. Lena had invited me to join her at her community garden project on Hampstead Heath, something I'd been putting off for months with various excuses. I'm too busy, I'd said. I have to help Jack with, but now that those excuses had evaporated, I realized I'd simply been afraid. Afraid to find out what I liked when I didn't have to worry about what others needed. The garden turned out to be a revelation. It was tucked away in a formerly derelict patch of land, transformed by a group of neighbors into a patchwork of raised beds, gravel paths, and a small greenhouse made from recycled windows. It was early in the season, but I could already see the first green shoots pushing through the soil, full of promise. Maggie, Lena said, introducing me to an older woman with earth-caked hands and bright eyes. This is Carmen. She runs the financial literacy program here on Tuesdays. Carmen shook my hand firmly. Financial literacy? In a garden? I asked. Why not? She laughed. They're both about planting seeds and nurturing them until they grow. Besides, a lot of the women who come here are trying to stretch every pound. We teach them how to grow their own food and grow their own savings at the same time. Something about the idea resonated with me immediately. For decades, I'd seen colleagues, especially young women, make terrible financial decisions simply because no one had ever taught them they had options. I'd seen single mothers work 2 jobs but never learn how to budget. I'd seen smart, capable women sign up for predatory loans because they didn't understand the terms. Do you need any help? I asked before I could stop myself. Carmen and Lena exchanged a look. Do you have a background in finance? A little, I said drily. 40 years as an accountant. That afternoon, I found myself kneeling next to a young mother named Sophia, helping her plant lettuce starts while we talked about budgeting. Sophia was 24, worked as a dental assistant, and was raising a 3-year-old boy on her own. She'd been living from paycheck to paycheck for so long she'd started to believe that was her only option. I've never had a savings account, she confessed, as she gently pressed the tiny plants into the soil. Every time I try to put something away, an emergency comes up. Have you heard of the principle of paying yourself first? I asked her. She shook her head. It's simple, I said, showing her how to space the plants evenly. Before you pay anything else, before groceries, even, you put something aside for yourself. Even if it's 10 pounds. Even if it's 5 pounds. The point is to train your brain to see yourself as a priority. Her eyes widened. But what if I don't have enough for everything else? Then you find ways to make everything else cost less, I said. Like this garden. Like cooking at home. Like buying secondhand. I paused, remembering my own years of scrimping. Poverty is not a moral failing, Sophia. But dependency can become one. We spent the next hour talking about small, practical strategies. How to automate savings so she couldn't accidentally spend them. How to negotiate bills. How to distinguish between wants and needs. It wasn't revolutionary stuff, but I could see something shifting in her expression as we talked, a kind of dawning realization that she might have more control than she'd thought. Will you be back next week? She asked me as we were packing up. Of course, I said, surprised by how much I meant it. Driving home that afternoon, I realized I hadn't thought about Jack once in the last 4 hours. I hadn't checked my phone for messages from him. I hadn't mentally rehearsed conversations we might have. For the first time in years, I had been completely present in my own life. That evening, I dialed a number I'd been avoiding for months. City lit, Jessica speaking. Hello, I said. I was wondering if you still have spaces in your beginner's Italian classes? Of course, when would you like to start? How soon is possible? Jessica laughed. I like your enthusiasm. We have a class starting on Tuesday. Does that work? After signing up for Italian, I found myself browsing the college's website, seeing what else they offered. Art history, a book club, salsa dancing on Friday nights. Things I'd been too busy to consider for years. Salsa dancing, I murmured aloud. Robert and I had talked about taking dance classes one day. When we have time, we'd said. When things settle down. Before I could change my mind, I signed up for that. On Tuesday night, I sat in a circle of 12 adults of various ages, stumbling over Italian pronunciations and feeling ridiculously happy. The instructor, a middle-aged Italian woman named Francesca, had the patience of a saint and the most infectious laugh I'd ever heard. Non abbiate pora. She would call out when we fumbled our words. Don't be afraid. Mistakes are how we learn. After class, a woman named Beth approached me. She was about my age, with silver hair cut in a chic bob and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are. Is this your first time taking a class here? She asked. Yes, I admitted. I'm rediscovering myself, I suppose. Beth smiled. Me too. I got divorced last year, after 30 years of marriage. Decided it was time to do all the things I'd been putting off. We ended up going for coffee afterwards and spent 2 hours talking about everything and nothing. Beth had been a librarian before she retired. She'd raised 3 children and, like me, had spent decades defining her identity through the needs of others. The strangest thing, she told me as she stirred her latte, is discovering that I actually like things I thought I hated. Like being alone. Like making decisions without having to consult anyone else. Do you ever feel guilty about it? I asked. All the time, she admitted. But I'm getting used to it. On the way home that night, I stopped at a bookshop that was open late and allowed myself to wander the aisles with no purpose. When was the last time I'd read something just because I wanted to, not because someone had recommended it or because it was good for me? I ended up buying 3 books. A novel about a woman who moves to Tuscany after a divorce, a cookbook about simple Italian food, and a biography of Georgia O'Keeffe I'd been meaning to read for years on Friday night. I headed nervously to my first salsa class. The studio was located above a picture-framing shop in Soho, and I could hear the music filtering down the stairs as I climbed. My courage almost failed me on the last step, but then I remembered something Sophia had said at the garden that week. The worst that can happen is that I'm terrible at it. So what? I'll still have tried something new. The class was, in fact, a disaster. I stepped on at least 3 different pairs of feet, lost the rhythm more times than I could count, and my face went beetroot red. But it was also the most unadulterated fun I'd had in years. There was something liberating about moving my body just for the joy of it, about laughing at my mistakes instead of agonizing over them. The instructor, a Puerto Rican man in his 50s named Carlos, had a gift for making everyone feel like they were a natural dancer, even when we clearly weren't. The dance is not about perfection, he told the class. It's about connection. To the music, to your partner, to yourself. Driving home that night, with salsa music playing on my radio and a lingering smile on my face, I realized something surprising. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about the future. I sat on my sofa, holding the drawing, my fingers tracing the waxy crayon lines of the 2 figures in the garden. A complex mix of emotions washed over me. A soaring joy that Maya was thinking of me. A deep sadness that she had to communicate in secret, but also something else. A sharp, fierce determination. Maya shouldn't have to navigate the murky waters of adult problems. She shouldn't have to choose sides or keep secrets. She deserved to have her grandmother in her life, and I deserved to have my granddaughter in mine. But it would happen on my terms now, not as a bargaining chip or a tool of manipulation, but as the pure, uncomplicated gift it was supposed to be, the love between a grandmother and her grandchild. That night, I began to draft something I had been considering for days, a new version of my will. This was no longer just about finances. It was a statement of my values. The Margaret Easton Financial Empowerment Fund, as James and I had decided to call it, would be the main beneficiary. I pictured it clearly. Scholarships specifically for single mothers returning to education, financial literacy workshops in community gardens like the one on the Heath, programs that helped women discover they had more power and more options than they had ever imagined. For Maya, I formalized the plan for an educational trust fund, which would become available directly to her when she turned 18. It wasn't something her parents could touch or use as leverage. It was her own future, secured regardless of the financial decisions made by the adults in her life. And for myself, for the first time in my adult life, I planned truly for my own happiness. That trip to Italy, I had been dreaming of art classes, perhaps a larger flat with space for a proper balcony garden. A life lived forwards, not backwards. As I wrote, I could almost hear the salsa music still playing softly from my kitchen radio, mingling with the nighttime sounds of the city. For the first time in years, the sounds of my own life didn't feel like background noise. They felt like a symphony. The salsa music had long faded from the radio when my phone vibrated with a local news notification. I usually ignored them, but something about the headline made me click. Cotswolds foreclosures rise 15% this quarter. It wasn't about Jack specifically, but something cold settled in my stomach. It had been 6 weeks since our confrontation, and though I had held to my resolution, a secret part of me had been hoping they would find a way to sort things out, that somehow the crisis would force them to grow, to adapt, to become the people they needed to be. My phone rang 3 days later, interrupting my Italian class. It was James, and his voice had that carefully neutral quality I had learned to associate with bad financial news. "Maggie, have you got a few minutes to talk?" Of course. I stepped out of the classroom and found a quiet corner in the corridor. "I've been monitoring the situation with your son's property, as you asked," he said. "The foreclosure was officially filed this morning." Even though I had been expecting it, the words hit me like a punch to the gut. "How long do they have?" 90 days, typically. "But given how far behind they are on payments." He paused. "Probably less." I hung up and stood in the corridor of the college, surrounded by the murmur of voices from other classes, other people living their lives forwards. A part of me wanted to run to the bank immediately, transfer whatever was necessary, stop this catastrophe before it was too late. But a stronger part, the part that had been growing over the last few weeks, held firm. This was not my emergency to solve. It had never been my emergency to solve. Instead, I drove home and pulled out the papers I had been preparing for weeks. It was time to finalize them. The next day, I met with James in his office to sign the foundation paperwork. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as we reviewed the documents one last time. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said, signing my name with a steady hand. Afterwards, I drove to Maya's school. I had called ahead and scheduled a meeting with Mrs. Patterson, the secretary who had been serving as the unofficial intermediary between Maya and me. "Mrs. Easton," she said when I arrived, "Maya will be so excited to know you came." "Actually," I said, handing her a sealed envelope, "I was wondering if you could give this to the school counselor, to keep in Maya's file. It's for when she's older." Inside the envelope were documents establishing the educational fund in Maya's name, enough to cover university, postgraduate studies, or whatever education she chose to pursue. The funds would be available directly to her at 18, with no parental strings attached. I also added, pulling out a second, smaller envelope, "If you could make sure she gets this today." That envelope contained a letter I had written and rewritten a dozen times. Asterisk, "My dearest Maya. Asterisk, asterisk, Grandma Maggie loves you very much. I hope you know that, no matter what is going on with the adults in your life right now. When you're a little older, I want to teach you about gardens, about planting seeds and nurturing them until they grow, about being patient with things that are worth waiting for. For now, just remember this. You are loved, you are valuable, and someday when you are old enough, you will have all the tools you need to build any kind of life you want. Keep drawing. Keep dreaming. Asterisk, asterisk, with all my love. Asterisk, asterisk, Grandma Maggie, asterisk, asterisk, Pitas. I've set something special up for your future. Your school counselor has the details, but when you turn 18, you'll find you have options you might not have known you had." Asterisk, driving home from the school, I felt as if I had just set down a weight I had been carrying for months. Not the sadness of losing Maya, because I hadn't lost her, not really, but the anxiety of not knowing how to protect her without sacrificing myself in the process. That evening, Lena came for dinner. I had started doing this regularly. Cooking real meals instead of just heating up frozen food, inviting friends over, treating my flat like a home instead of just a place to sleep. So, Lena said, helping herself to a second portion of the risotto I'd made, Beth mentioned you two are actually planning that Italy trip. We're thinking about it, I admitted. October, maybe, after I've had a few more Italian classes. And what about the salsa thing? Are you getting any better? I laughed. Barely. But it's fun. Carlos says I have natural rhythm, but I think he's just being kind. You know what I love most about this new version of you? Lena said, leaning back in her chair. What? You're glowing. Literally. It's like someone turned a light on inside you. Before I could answer, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jack's number. Lena and I looked at each other. Are you going to answer? I let it ring through to voicemail. Whatever he had to say could wait until I had finished dinner with my friend. But he kept calling. 5 times in an hour. Finally, after Lena had left, I listened to the voicemails. The first was coherent but desperate. * Mom, please call me. We need to talk. * The second was more frantic. * Mom, I know you said no, but the situation has changed. Chloe's gone. She took Maya to her parents in Manchester. She says she's not coming back until I can figure out how to provide some stability. Please, call me. * The third one broke my heart. * Mom, I don't know what to do. The house is going into foreclosure. I lost my job. I couldn't focus, I kept getting pulled away to be on the phone with lawyers and banks. Maya keeps asking me when she's coming home and I don't know what to tell her. I need you. I know you probably hate hearing that, but I need you. * The fourth was barely a whisper. Please, just please. I sat on my sofa, holding the phone, feeling the familiar pull of decades of maternal instinct. This was the voice of my little boy, calling for me in the middle of the night. This was the voice I had answered automatically for 35 years. But I also remembered something Sophia had said at the garden last week. We had been talking about boundaries, about the difference between helping and enabling destructive behavior. My mom used to rescue me from everything, she'd said. She thought she was protecting me, but really she was just teaching me that I didn't have to be responsible for my own choices. Took me years to unlearn that. I dialed Jack's number. Mom? His voice was hoarse, as if he'd been crying. Hello, Jack. Thank God you heard my messages. I heard them. Then you know how bad it is. Chloe's gone. The house is gone. My job. His voice broke. I don't know how I got here. Yes. Yes, you do, I said, my voice gentle but firm. You got here through a series of choices. Your choices. You can't be doing this now, not when everything is falling apart. Especially now, I said. Jack, do you know how old I was when your father died? The question took him aback. What? I don't know, 30-something? 34, exactly. 1 year younger than you are now. I let that sink in. And do you know what I didn't have when my world fell apart? A wealthy parent to bail me out. I didn't have anyone to make my mortgage payments or co-sign my loans. I had to figure it out on my own. That's different. How? Because you're a man? Because you grew up with privileges I never had? Those things should have made you more capable of handling this, not less. There was a long silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. What am I supposed to do?